Thomas Meyer, if you can hear me, welcome to you. And let's start out this way. What's wrong with Europe with Greece turning to the IMF?
Well, I think there are two problems with that. I mean, number one is that the IMF obviously is an institution that represents many countries. So the inner problems of EMU would be discussed at the IMF board, and other countries would give their opinion and express recommendations. Moreover, the IMF also looks at monetary policy, and the ECB may not feel too happy about the IMF perhaps touching upon its own policies. But most importantly, and I think this is absolutely crucial, the IMF has no mechanism to allow for the worst case scenario, namely that a country goes bankrupt. The IMF, as we have seen in Argentina, pulls out and leaves the country to its own devices. I think that is something that we cannot afford in EMU.
Well, exactly how would this European Monetary Fund work? How would it fund itself?
Well, my co-author of this paper where we make the proposal, Daniel Gros and myself, have suggested that the funding of the EMF would in the long run be created by taxing the countries that break the Maastricht speed limit. So deficits above 3%, debt ratios above 60% would actually make you pay into the fund. Of course, that would be the long run funding basis. To start up the fund, you would give it borrowing authority so that it would be endowed with some money to begin with, money that it could lend under strict conditions to countries that are facing an adjustment problem and need bridge financing to get this adjustment done.
This is a fundamental change, it would be, to the EU, to the EMU. So would they need to go back and change the treaty, something that, of course, would require the acceptance of all the EU member states? And we know how difficult it is to sometimes get them to agree.
You know, I'm just an economist. I'm not a legal expert, and I could imagine that especially EU law is an extremely complicated matter. But to me, as a simple economist, I could see possibilities that are not so complicated in changing the entire treaty. After all, the Lisbon Treaty has a clause allowing country to engage in what they called enhanced cooperation, i.e. to conduct projects among themselves that are not necessarily already laid down in the treaty. I suppose that the lawyers will, over the coming months, if this initiative is pursued, over the coming months will discuss ways to implement this, and I'm at this point in time I'm not so pessimistic to think that it would require a change of the Lisbon Treaty and full ratification of this change by all the EU member countries.
Can I just ask you, are you directly consulting with the German government on how this fund would look?
No, I'm not. Daniel Gros, my friend, Daniel Gros and myself, we have made this proposal. We have published this. We had some interaction before the German government took a position on this with officials, but it's entirely their own decision and we're not consulting.
What do you say to Jürgen Stark's comments? He says that the ECB, he says an EMF would breach treaty rules and it would undermine public support for the euro and for the EU.
I would love to discuss this in more detail with Mr. Stark, because I think that he has at this point not fully appreciated what we had in mind. Mr. Stark has pointed out that it would create additional moral hazard, i.e. Induce countries to engage in reckless fiscal policies as they could fall back on that fund. I think actually the opposite is the case. Right now, a country that has a fiscal problem will of course make a very big effort to get its problem right, but if it cannot, it may default, and then it will tell to the other countries, look, I cannot make the adjustment, I default, but you cannot allow me to default because problem country creates so much problems for you, my partner countries. You will have to bail me out in the end. This institution that we have recommended would actually allow an orderly default of a country and therefore actually reduce the moral hazard of a country saying, well, you know, we cannot really be let default because we would creating an existential problem for the euro area. I think it's a reduction in moral hazard.
Okay, thanks so much, Thomas Meyer, chief economist there of Deutsche Bank.